Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. Today, I'm honored to welcome Liran Kandin. He is the founder of the NCA Tutor, a lawyer in both New York and Ontario, and a leading voice in legal education, whose guidance has supported almost 4,000 internationally trained lawyers from around the world on their journey into the Canadian legal profession. Thank you so much for making the time and come on the podcast today, Liran.
It's a pleasure to be here, Claudio. And of course, it's not our first time meeting. So I remember quite a while back where we discussed this podcast, and I kind of flipped the script around and said, no, I have to email you because I thought what you were doing was really unique. You were a student at the University of Toronto doing your GPLLM, and I thought this podcast was excellent. You were really putting yourself out there. You were networking and doing things that many students should be doing. And so I thought that was very unique, special. And that's why I wanted to interview you. And it's nice that we've now come around and it seems like it's my turn here.
Absolutely. It was great to collaborate in the past, and I appreciate you making the time to come on the show. And I'd love for you to start telling us a little bit about your journey qualifying both in New York and Ontario, being an entrepreneur. I know you're a proud father as well, educator. Tell us a little more about who you are.
Sure. So, yes, I do have kind of a diverse background, and I did get qualified in a couple of places. There's that expression, man plans and God laughs at our plans kind of thing. I wouldn't say that none of it was intentional. Of course, there was intent behind it, but I couldn't have imagined the life I have right now. And so opportunities came up along the way, and I just had to keep an open mind and how things went. I've lived in several countries. I met my second half, who I'm now married to, while I was studying abroad. And that brought us to, I'll just give you a shortcut, but love kind of took me to a different country after. And that's where I ended up in New York City and qualified in New York while simultaneously qualifying in Ontario and starting an education company from there. So it certainly wasn't my intent to do all of those things. I definitely intended to become a lawyer. I didn't intend to become a multi-jurisdictional lawyer. That just happened. And it's just the way things fell in line, where I had to adapt to my circumstances and I had to adapt to being with somebody who wasn't from the same country as me. And yeah, so it's brought up amazing opportunities and unique challenges, and getting dual qualified was part of that experience. And being in education as well was very intentional because it helped with the lifestyle I was living, where I was constantly traveling, and being in education allowed me to do that at the time. Today, the legal industry is changing, and there are many lawyers that are traveling and practicing at the same time if they set up their firms correctly. Certainly, my story is, I like to call it a love story, if you will, and that's how I ended up where I am.
That's amazing. I'd love to hear that. I don't know if we specifically talked about this before, but it was also the reason I decided to come back to Canada, right? Meeting my wife is definitely what motivated the move and becoming a lawyer here. So funny that that's an intersection.
Yeah, I guess not an uncommon story. Yes.
There you
But
go. There you go. So I want to hear a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey as well, but you've built something quite extraordinary. And then also from over 70 countries, you've helped them to navigate the Canadian licensing process. I'm curious, beyond the possibility of working while traveling and all of that, what inspired you to build the NCA tutor and what have you learned along the way?
So that NCA tutor was very much intentional. When you ask me what inspired me to get into it, well, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to work in this space. But my story is not like many of the students who come through our program. I immigrated to Canada about a year old. My parents obviously immigrated as well with us. And I experienced the challenges of what it's like to move countries where you're unfamiliar with the language, where work in the profession perhaps that you were originally qualified to do. And I saw the struggles of my parents who came out successful in the end. They worked very hard, but at times it was extremely hard working multiple jobs, doing things that they probably normally wouldn't have done back in their home countries. And watching them struggle through that, it made NCA tutor personal for me. And I've seen many of the candidates who struggled really with adapting to a new country, adapting to a new home, adapting, working simultaneously in jobs that I'm not going to say are not meaningful jobs, but it's certainly not the jobs that they originally trained for. And so you have highly qualified individuals who are doing other types of jobs that they normally wouldn't have done. And I really want to help them through this process. I really wanted to make it work for them because, again, I see it like my parents, my family. Originally, my mom was going through this immigration process, ended up being a single mom with two kids, and she was navigating the whole system, barely speaking English. And so I know what those challenges are like, and I see it as personal helping my mom in that sense. And I've been super fortunate to help many people get through that process and watch them cross the finish line and become very successful lawyers. And it's incredibly rewarding, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So I think I'll continue in this education space, education for me, and watching that successful immigrant story or helping those make it a successful story, I think is quite personal to me.
That's beautiful. And you've had quite the front row seat seeing the changes in policy, in practice, everything related to the legal licensing in the country for more than a decade now. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your thoughts on how things have developed over time and maybe became more challenging. What are some opportunities that also arose? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the licensing process has gone through major changes. I've run NCA Tutor for over 14 years now, but I've been around that licensing process a little longer, having gone through it myself. I would say that there are a lot more opportunities now. Things have become much more clear. The regulatory rules are more defined, and I think the process is easier in that sense, which is great. I'll give you some examples. So, students who are going through this process today have a very detailed policy. All right. The National Committee on Accreditation has a very detailed policy, whereas before it wasn't as clear and concise as it is today. When you received your assessments and you would have to take these licensing examinations to show an equivalency of your foreign degree, those examinations that you would take, they were mostly self-study examinations. They would provide you with a course syllabus. Some of the syllabi, I remember, were just read this textbook, and that was it. Just gave you a textbook and said, do this. Now they're very detailed, they're step by step. They tell you exactly which sections of the textbook you should be reading, which cases you should be looking at. So there's a lot more structure, there's clarity, and of course, there's more support available that wasn't there, certainly when I went through the process, and certainly not 20 years ago or before that, right? Companies like my own, NCA Tutor, are providing resources for students, study materials that can help them learn the materials quicker. We provide courses to individuals. Those are the things that weren't available. I really helped create that space myself and my team and everybody involved. And so in that sense, it's changed. And I think it's easier for students to go through the process now because there's more support, there are more alumni, right? And there are greater networking opportunities available. From a licensing perspective as well, the process of getting qualified has changed significantly since COVID, where before examinations were done in person, which could create quite complex, unique challenges for new immigrants to the country. The process to get your certificate of qualification from the National Committee on Accreditation may take you anywhere from 3 months to a few years to get that accreditation. And for someone who's a new immigrant to Canada, that often means you can't practice, you can't even start the licensing process in the province until you've gone through those stages. Now that the examinations have shifted to online, you could start and complete the entire process and receive your certificate of qualification before even setting foot into Canada. And I think that's a huge benefit to immigrants or those who are considering immigrating to Canada because you can get most of the licensing process or a significant portion of the licensing process out of the way, and then you can register with your provincial bar and then go through that licensing process like any law student who had just completed law school would have done. So it cuts down significant barriers. You don't have to live off of your savings. And I think that those changes are very welcome. I think that helps families a lot, particularly families, right? People moving with their entire families to Canada. So I think it's a huge change. It's a very big positive growth. I think the guidance, the clarity, all of those are excellent things that I've seen over the last 15 years or so in this space. So it's a good time to go through the conversion process in Canada, I think.
Very interesting. To be honest, I didn't know that the exams were conducted online, and it's always interesting to see the changes in policy. And glad to hear from someone in the space that the process has become a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more predictable as well. When talking a little bit more about your business, I'd love to hear lessons you learned on becoming an entrepreneur. It's so valuable to have someone to guide you along that path.
Yeah, I was exposed to entrepreneurship very early on. My parents were entrepreneurs. My father had a mechanic shop, which expanded to a body shop and car sales. And I used to work there as early as 9 years old. I mean, work. I used to hang around, clean the shop, wipe down tools, and eventually you graduate to other things. And the important thing for me was learning relationships, learning the importance of how to work with people that work for you, how to resolve problems, and all kinds of things that go on when you're running a business. And so I got exposed to that at a very early age. I remember doing my own entrepreneurial activities at a very young age and going door to door and shoveling snow from neighbors' driveways and expanding that into a much bigger project. So, yes, so I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit. For me, being in this niche education market, it's something that doesn't scale and expand into many other businesses that I've been in, but I'm intentionally staying in this market. One of the things I learned, which was very important, was to create trust, create loyalty. And so before scaling, I would first build my brand, which I worked on. I didn't get into this business initially. It wasn't a business for me. I was creating study materials for myself for my own exams. And I ended up releasing those to the public for free. And for about 5 years, I used to give out my study materials for free to students, and they helped correct them. They sent me feedback on them, and I just wanted to improve on them. And then, of course, after 5 years, and I was already out there and practicing doing different things, I wasn't primarily doing the education business. There were new updates coming out, new textbooks, new cases, and I had to invest a lot of time into it. And so I started a business out of it. And I said, okay, I'll update these materials that have already become highly successful and popular. And students were now contacting me for education services. My team was expanding. We had a number of lawyers now teaching for this organization. And so it started with building a good reputation and doing good work. And from there, things just took off. And I was able to really expand on it. So I think that was an important thing, at least when you're dealing in a very niche market, is create your brand, make sure you focus on quality, and the work will come. It'll pour in, which is true.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, beyond being an entrepreneur, as you said, you've been in and out of practice for a few times. So you've served on a board of a public traded company, chaired governance, audit, compensation committees, managed outside counsel. Tell me a little bit more about that experience and how did that experience build your perspective on corporate governance, on the role that lawyers can play in helping really organizations to make those strategic decisions beyond the legal advice.
Yeah, sitting on the board of this publicly traded company in a non-legal role was very interesting because now I'm the client and I have a number of law firms as my representatives and I'm managing that relationship on behalf of the board for the board. I think that having a law license and having practiced law gives you a significant heads up in this space. And lawyers can do a lot of good work as a result because you have so much knowledge on the inner workings, how law firms work, how decisions are made, and what your role is as a director of a publicly traded company and what your responsibilities are. Those are unique insights that I probably wouldn't have had and not gone through and become a lawyer. And so I think lawyers can contribute in many ways in society. And not just through legal work. Corporate governance is one of them. It's an important role. It's important that companies have structures in place, and having that inside knowledge could make you better at that job. It was a very interesting experience to experience the other side of it. And I think that if I go back and I start advising people in those roles from a legal side now, I'll have more knowledge of what it's like to be in their shoes as well. So it's good to have sat on both sides of the coin. I think it makes you a better lawyer as well. Lawyers should take up those opportunities. You can do so through volunteership and not for profit boards and stuff like that. There's a lot of value add that you can bring even if you haven't sat on a board before. So don't be afraid to try out those new things. I was in a space, and I'll open it up. It was in the cannabis space. So the company I got involved with, the regulatory changes were happening rapidly. Weekly laws are changing, regulations are changing, and we had to navigate through very complex things. And it was interesting to see that lawyers themselves don't always know all the answers, and you kind of have to guide them and help them in that space. And that's normal. And I think for some of us, that imposter syndrome that you might be feeling as a new graduate going into law, it's very real. But even for experienced lawyers, when the law is rapidly changing, they don't always know all the answers. The point is that you're trained in law and how to research things and you can figure it out, but don't think that you should know everything, and don't let that stop you from trying out new things in your career.
That's amazing. All you can do with a law degree, even if you are in a non-legal capacity, it's just always motivating to hear. Reminds me that things will work out and that opportunities will show for those who are looking for them, who are interested in building that part of your professional practice. And beyond all of these experiences, Liran, I know you're currently relaunching your private practice. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. You have this focus on cross-border state planning and corporate law. You are licensed both in New York and Ontario. What are some of your thoughts on doing that? And maybe are there specific pains, problems that you're planning on solving as you work with those families, individuals, businesses across these jurisdictions?
Yes. And of course, this is something that's very intentional and personal to me as well. My parents are the baby boomer generation. A significant portion of the population now is retiring, and many of them, if not most, have no plan for the future. A lot of people don't think about the day they die or the day after, rather. And I think there's a need to educate people on that. So I'll be continuing in the education space and making sure that I'm educating people on the things, the steps they should be taking to plan correctly and to help people strategically plan so that their children or whoever is inheriting their estate will benefit the most from it, right? So again, I look at the generation of my parents, specifically the immigrants who, at least from Eastern European countries, where they're very reserved about government and they have very little trust in government and authoritative figures. And that includes lawyers as well, sometimes, who they may see as some sort of authoritative figure. And it's very important to help break down those barriers and help them understand that they actually have to plan this out. They have to find somebody that they can trust and work with who's going to be on their side and is going to make sure that their wishes are going to be respected, right, when they pass. So that's part of the goal here, is to work with people in that generation and help them plan ahead. And the cross-border aspect is just, it's part of this whole change that I see happening post-COVID where people started traveling a lot. It's not uncommon for families to live in multiple jurisdictions right now or hold assets in multiple. I know many Canadians who are emigrating. Many Americans are emigrating. And so this cross-border aspect is part of that. And I think it's very useful to have somebody who's got the knowledge base and who can deal with assets in multiple jurisdictions. It's not going to be limited to New York and Ontario. I hope to partner with other legal professionals and offer services in multiple jurisdictions. And so it's a passion project as well. It's something, again, I want to help people in my parents' generation. And I think this is a great way to feel fulfilled in the work that I do, is to find something that I'm passionate about. And that makes the work more enjoyable for me personally.
Absolutely. To head towards wrapping up today's episode, for those who are listening to this episode who are law students, NCA candidates, young professionals starting out their careers, what are some pieces of advice that you have to share for those who are trying to build a successful practice, a fulfilling career? There's a lot of uncertainty in what that will look like in the future when you factor in the geopolitics, AI, so many other things that can be put into consideration. But the more I do the podcast, I find that each generation had some kind of crisis, some kind of uncertainty coming up. So, did you experience any of that? And tell me a little bit about how that went for you and if you have some advice based on what you see going on these days.
I remember graduating from law school thinking, okay, we've got debt, we've got all kinds of things going on, and you see all these successful lawyers making money. When am I going to be there? When am I going to become that? When am I going to be a partner? And I learned to simply say things will come in the right time and in the right stage. It's not helpful to try and look so far ahead. And it may not even be that far ahead. It may be 5 years down the road. It may be 10 years down the road. And for someone graduating today, 10 years seems like ages, but it's not. You blink and 10 years have gone by. It's amazing. So try not to rush the process. Try not to long for where you should be. Try and enjoy the moments that you have. It is possible to do that. Okay. At different stages in your life, I'm not talking about your career, but in your life, you're going to aspire to different things. So make sure that you can adapt. For example, I was young, I was hungry, I just wanted to learn and be the best I can be at being a lawyer. I think that's a great first goal, right? You may get married one day, you might have children, and then you may have other things that you aspire to, and work is still important, but maybe 10, 15 years down the road, money is not as tight as it once was when you were a student. And so your goals and objectives may change now, and now you're looking for fulfillment in your life rather than a big paycheck. And having counseled and mentored many people through the licensing process, I still maintain relationships with students I've had 14 years ago and stuff. It's not uncommon for people to even say, I'm going to take this job, even though it doesn't pay as much as what I was making, because I think it's more fulfilling for me. It's more desirable for me. I really enjoy it. And this is what I want to do. And this is where I see myself. So your objectives, your goals may change over the years. Certainly, it's a good idea to have a plan in mind and try and strive and work towards that plan. Just also know that there are going to be changes in plans, and you have to be ready for those changes. And that includes AI, includes everything happening around us, right? So we have to be able to be open and to adapt to change and to learn how to adapt successfully. So my advice to students now is keep an open mind, right? Keep your eye on the ball on what you want. I think that's important, but also watch out for other opportunities. Don't let them go by. You never know where they may take you. Try and enjoy this ride that we call life because it can be enjoyable and it should be.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for making the time to come on the show and share a little bit more about this really interesting career you've built for yourself. It's inspiring to watch. It was actually quite nice when we first met. You came to be a guest lecturer as at one of the classes that I was taking in negotiation, and it was quite nice when you introduced yourself up front, and then a few students that you had met in the UK before came up. It's really beautiful to observe, and thank you for making the time to come on the show. It really means a lot.
It's my pleasure. And I think I was more surprised than you were to see that students at that U of T class actually knew who I was. So that was a nice surprise. It's a pleasure. And it was great for you to come up and introduce yourself to me. And it was great. That's how we got this kind of relationship started and got to know each other. And we've met at other events as well. And I think that's great. And you're one of the students that I'm going to continue to keep in touch with. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you, because I think you're a great model for other students and what they should be doing. You're no longer a student, you're now a lawyer. It was just yesterday that we met. It feels like it was just yesterday. And things have changed for you too. And I'm sure your goals and objectives in life have changed since we met as well. Thank you for having me. And yeah, and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you all for tuning into today's episode, and we'll see you on the next one.